I kissed a stranger at my best friend's engagement party, and the worst part wasn't the embarrassment. The worst part was that I knew exactly who I meant to kiss, and somehow I still got it wrong. Let me back up. I'd been seeing Callum for 4 months. 4 good months. The kind that sneak up on you, and suddenly you're making inside jokes, and leaving a toothbrush at someone's place without really deciding to. Callum was a landscape architect who drove a sensible Subaru, and remembered how I liked my coffee, and never once made me feel like I was too much. After the disaster that was my last relationship, don't ask, sensible and steady felt like a revelation. His best friend Nate was getting engaged to my coworker Bree. The world is small that way. The engagement party was at a rooftop venue in downtown Chicago, the kind of place with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and bartenders who know how to make a proper Aperol spritz. I wore a green wrap dress because Callum had once mentioned, very casually, that green looked good on me. I was nervous, but the manageable kind. Meeting a boyfriend's friends is just a social test you study for, by being yourself and asking good questions. I could do that. What I wasn't prepared for was the elevator doors opening on the rooftop level, and Callum saying, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, I should mention, my brother is going to be here." "You have a brother?" "Older. Roman." He said the name with a certain flatness, the same tone you'd use for a weather system you'd rather not discuss. "We don't really. We're not close." "How not close?" The elevator opened before he could answer. The party was already buzzing, Nate waving from across the room. Bree already a little teary, in the beautiful way people get at their own celebrations. Callum got absorbed into the greeting, and I got absorbed into the ambient chaos of people I mostly knew by name, but not by face. I was on my second drink, standing near the windows with the whole Chicago skyline doing its best to impress everyone, when Bree materialized at my elbow. "Okay, so," she said in her low conspiracy voice, "Roman Vasquez is here, Callum's brother? I literally just found out he existed. Oh, they're complicated," she made a face. "But Roman is," she paused, clearly editing herself. "He's a lot how?" She was already being pulled away by her future mother-in-law. "You'll see," she called back unhelpfully. "The thing about identical twins is that nobody warns you adequately." Callum had mentioned a brother. He had not mentioned a brother who looked exactly like him in every measurable way, except the intangible. The ones that lived in posture and expression, and the particular angle at which someone holds a drink. I didn't know that yet when I saw him across the room. I saw dark hair, the jaw I'd gotten used to, the height. I saw what looked like Callum standing near the bar with his back slightly turned, and I felt the warm, uncomplicated instinct of 4 months of habit. I crossed the room. I touched his arm. He turned, and I rose onto my toes and kissed him. For exactly 1 second, nothing happened. He didn't pull away. He didn't respond either, just went completely still in a way. Callum never did, a kind of contained alertness, like an animal that's decided to see what happens next rather than react. I pulled back. I have genuinely excellent instincts about when I've made a terrible mistake. They kicked in approximately 1 breath too late. The man looking at me was and wasn't Callum. Same face, same dark eyes, same everything. Except the eyes themselves were doing something different. Callum looked at me like I was something worth protecting. This man looked at me like I was something interesting. There is a difference. I felt it in my sternum. "Wrong, brother," he said. His voice was the same pitch as Callum's, but slower. More deliberate. Like he had time and intended to use it. My face went hot enough to power a small city. "I'm so sorry." I stepped back and nearly knocked into a passing waiter. "I thought you were. You look exactly. I didn't know." That we were identical? Something moved through his expression. Not quite amusement. Something more patient than that. Callum tends to forget to mention it. "I'm Isla." I said my name because I needed to say something, and that was the least complicated option. "I know." He extended a hand with the calm of someone who had not just been kissed by a stranger. "Roman." I shook it. His grip was firm, and he held it a half-second longer than necessary before letting go. I felt the warmth of it even after. Callum appeared from nowhere, his hand finding the small of my back. "I see you've met my brother." "In a manner of speaking," Roman said. The look that passed between them was the kind that requires years of shared history to decode. I understood none of it, except that it wasn't comfortable. "Isla." Callum said my name like a gentle redirect. "Can I get you another drink?" We spent the rest of the party on the opposite side of the rooftop. I laughed at the right times and made conversation about Nate and Bree and the upcoming wedding venue search, and underneath all of it, I was achingly aware that Roman Vasquez was somewhere behind me, existing in the same airspace, and that I had kissed him by accident and felt something I had absolutely no business feeling. On the drive home, Callum was quiet in the particular way that means he's thinking something he hasn't decided to say yet. "Your brother," I started. "Roman. What does he do?" Callum's hands adjusted on the wheel. "Private equity. Risk management, really. He takes companies apart and figures out what's worth keeping." A pause. "He applies the same logic to most things in his life. You two don't get along. We get along fine." He said it the way people say the food was fine at a restaurant they'd never return to. "We're just different. I build things. Roman reorganizes them." He didn't say anything else. I didn't ask. But that night in my apartment in Lincoln Park with the radiator doing its seasonal complaints and my cat asleep on my feet, I lay awake thinking about the way Roman had gone still. Not startled. Still. The way a person goes still when they've chosen to pay attention. I told myself it meant nothing. I'm a financial analyst. I work with numbers for a living, which means I'm professionally trained to distinguish between data and interpretation, between what something is and what I want it to mean. The kiss was an accident. The feeling was adrenaline and embarrassment. Roman Vasquez was my boyfriend's older brother, and I was going to stop thinking about him immediately. I almost managed it. Callum and I had been together long enough that I was used to the particular rhythm of us. Weeknight dinners at the Thai place on Armitage, weekend mornings where he brought over coffee, and I pretended to still be asleep for exactly 5 minutes because I liked the part where he found me. We were comfortable. I was happy in the way that's quiet and doesn't announce itself. 2 weeks after the party, Nate and Bree had a casual dinner at their place in Wicker Park. 6 people around a dining table, good pasta, better wine. I almost didn't go, and then I went, and there was Roman seated across from the empty chair that had my name on it in every karmic sense. "Isla." He said my name when I sat down, not a greeting exactly, more like confirmation of a hypothesis. "Roman." I unfolded my napkin. This is either the universe being hilarious or Bree being strategic. He reached for the wine. Across the table, Callum was talking to Nate about a park redesign project he was bidding on, his attention fully elsewhere. I noticed Roman noticed this. "How's the financial analysis business?" he asked. "You know what I do?" Nate mentioned it. He said it evenly, no particular emphasis. "Risk modeling for mid-market acquisitions, mostly." I studied him. "And you take companies apart and figure out what's worth keeping." Something shifted in his expression. Callum described me efficiently. That's one word for it. He looked at me directly, which I was learning was his default mode. Roman didn't glance around a room the way most people did. He decided where to look and then looked there. "Do you enjoy it? The risks modeling." "I'm good at it." "That's not always the same thing." "No," he said, "it's not." And the way he said it made me think he understood that particular gap from personal experience. We talked for most of the dinner. Nothing incriminating. The Cubs' seasonal underachievement, a documentary about urban infrastructure we'd both apparently watched, the specific frustration of Chicago winters. But underneath the conversation was a current I kept trying to name and couldn't. He was intense in the way that some people are, not aggressive, just fully present, like he'd decided the conversation deserved his entire attention and was going to give it. By the time dessert arrived, Callum had noticed. His hand found mine under the table, a gesture that was simultaneously sweet and pointed. Walking to the train afterward, I said, "Your brother is different in person." Callum was quiet for half a block. He's always been good at making people feel like the most interesting thing in the room. Is that a warning? It's an observation. He stopped at the corner, hands in his jacket pockets. "Roman doesn't do anything without a reason, Isla. He's never impulsive. Everything is calculated." He looked at me, even when it doesn't look that way. I heard the subtext. I didn't argue with it, but I thought about it for 3 days. My best friend Dana found me at our weekly Thursday lunch, staring at a salad I hadn't touched. Dana is a pediatric nurse and has approximately no patience for emotional evasion, which makes her an excellent friend and a socially inconvenient one. "You look terrible," she said helpfully. "Thank you. What happened?" I told her everything. The party, the accidental kiss, the dinner, the conversation, the current I couldn't name. Dana ate her entire sandwich before she responded. Okay, but here's the thing. You've been with Callum for 4 months, and you've never once mentioned the word electric. I didn't use that word. You described talking about the Cubs as electric. That was about his brother. I had in fact used that word. I chose not to confirm it. Callum is good, I said instead. He's genuinely good. Thoughtful and steady and safe, Dana said. That's not a criticism, I know. But you have a history, Isla. She set down her coffee. Before Callum, there was the architect who kept emergency whiskey in his desk and thought ambiguity was a personality. Before him was the journalist, who was perpetually on the verge of something huge. You have always been drawn to intensity, and then talked yourself out of it in favor of the sensible option. Because the sensible option usually doesn't break your heart. Also true. She looked at me steadily. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you to be honest with yourself about what you feel before you make promises you're keeping out of guilt rather than love. My phone buzzed. Callum's name. Are you free Saturday? Want to show you something I'm working on. I texted back. Of course, and I tried very hard not to think about Roman. I succeeded for 11 days. Then Roman texted me. The number was unknown. The message was, the Cubs game you mentioned is actually on Saturday. Thought you'd want to know. It should have been nothing. It was objectively nothing. I sat with the phone in my hand for 10 minutes and then put it face down on my desk and went back to the spreadsheet I was supposed to be reviewing. I didn't respond. He texted again 4 days later. Just, how's the risk modeling going? I responded this time. Fine. Busy season. You? The reply was immediate. Thinking about a project that's more complicated than it looked initially. I put the phone down again. My pulse was doing things it had no reasonable explanation for. The situation clarified itself on a Sunday afternoon in November. Callum and I were at a gallery opening for a friend of his, a sculptor who worked in reclaimed steel. It was the kind of event where the wine is adequate and the art is interesting, and everyone is being their most thoughtful public self. Roman was there. I found out the way you find out things at parties, by suddenly seeing them across a room. He was talking to someone near the far wall, one hand in his jacket pocket, listening with that particular focused attention. He looked up and found me immediately, like he'd known I was there before I'd seen him. He excused himself from the conversation and came over. Callum saw him at the same moment. His hand moved to my back again, that same quiet gesture. Small city, Roman said. Chicago, I agreed. The three of us stood there in the specific social geometry of a situation nobody wanted to name. Callum's hand on my back, Roman's eyes on my face, me halfway between them in ways that had nothing to do with physical positioning. I saw your firm's name on the Meridian Capital deal, Roman said to me. Good restructuring work. You follow mid-market acquisitions. I follow interesting decisions. His eyes were direct. You made a counterintuitive call on the liability structure. Most analysts would have played it safe. You didn't. Callum said something to someone near us. I barely registered it. Sometimes the counterintuitive call is the right one, I said. Yes, Roman said quietly. It is. He stayed for 20 minutes and then left. Callum and I drove home mostly in silence. When he pulled up outside my building, he turned off the engine but didn't move. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay. Do you have feelings for my brother? The question sat between us, very still, waiting. I could have lied. I'm good at clean answers. It's the nature of my work. The ability to make complicated data resolve into a single, defensible conclusion. But sitting in Callum's car with the streetlights coming through the windshield, I couldn't make this data resolve into anything clean. I don't know what I have, I said, but I don't think I can honestly tell you that I don't feel something. Callum exhaled slowly. That's what I thought. Callum, you know what the worst part is. He wasn't angry. That almost made it harder. I knew, the night of the party. Not what would happen, but that something had shifted. The way you looked when you pulled back and saw him. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. I've watched Roman do this my whole life. Walk into a room and rearrange it. This isn't something he did to me. I know. He looked at me. That's actually what makes it harder. I got out of the car. I stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and watched him drive away, and felt the particular grief of ending something good for reasons that were true but not simple. I didn't text Roman that night. I didn't text anyone. I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine I didn't drink and thought about what Dana had said, about making promises out of guilt rather than love. Callum deserved better than being second choice. I'd known that before I could admit why. I texted Roman the next morning, "We should talk." His response, "I'll come to you. Name the place." We met at a coffee shop near my office, Neutral Ground. He was already there when I arrived, coffee in front of him, jacket over the back of his chair, looking like someone who had nowhere else to be, and was fine with that. "I ended things with Callum," I said, before I'd fully sat down. Something crossed his expression. Not triumph, something more careful than that. "How is he?" Hurt, dignified about it, which is very Callum, and also somehow worse. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. "I didn't end it for you. I ended it because I wasn't being honest with him about what I felt. I know. I need you to understand that. Isla." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not interested in a version of this where you came to me by default. If that were the case, I'd tell you to go work out whatever you need to work out, and come back when you're sure." "How long have you been interested?" I asked. "Actually. Because I need to know if this started as something else." He considered the question, which I appreciated. Roman didn't seem to do anything without consideration. "The moment you pulled back from kissing me, and instead of dissolving into pure mortification, you said, 'I didn't know he had a brother,' like it was information you deserved to have been given." He tilted his head slightly. "Most people would have just kept apologizing. You went straight to accountability. That's what caught your attention? The accountability? You'd be surprised what's rare. A beat. Also the fact that 2 weeks later at a dinner where you had every reason to avoid me, you talked about infrastructure policy for 20 minutes, like it was the most natural thing in the world." Something in his expression softened in a way I hadn't seen before. "I've had a lot of conversations where people perform interest in what I do. You were just interested." I looked at him across the small table, at the face that looked so much like Callum's and was so entirely different. "This is going to be complicated," I said. "Yes, your family will have opinions. My parents will be concerned about Callum. He'll be angry for a while, which is fair." He didn't look away. "None of that changes what I want, if you're asking. I'm asking whether you've thought about the cost. I run risk assessments for a living." The edge of his mouth moved. "I've thought about the cost. And I'm still here." He reached across the table and turned my coffee cup slightly, a small adjustment, unconscious. "I'm not built for things that aren't worth the cost, Isla. I'd have walked away from this a month ago if I thought it wasn't." I believed him. That was the thing. With Callum, I'd always trusted him, but there was a gentleness to his honesty that sometimes made me wonder if he softened the hard edges for my sake. Roman didn't soften anything. He just told me the truth and let me decide what to do with it. "I need you to know something," I said. "I'm not doing this because you're dangerous and Callum was safe. I know that's the easy narrative. Is it the true one?" "No." I met his eyes. "I'm doing this because you're the only person I've met in a long time who talks to me like I can handle the actual version of things, not the edited one." Roman looked at me for a long moment. "Then let's not edit anything." The next 2 months were complicated in the exact ways I'd anticipated, and a few I hadn't, Callum told his friends. Some of them, the ones who knew Roman's particular history of intensity, understood in the grim way people understand things they don't endorse. Others made it simpler than it was in the way people do. I was the woman who'd kissed the wrong brother and ended up with the right one. And somehow that made me either romantic or a villain, depending on who was telling the story. Dana remained aggressively on my side while also reserving the right to monitor the situation. "If he does anything sketchy," she informed me over our Thursday lunch, "I will make his professional life very difficult in ways that can't be traced back to me." "He's fine, Dana. I'm sure he is. I'm just establishing my position." She stabbed a forkful of salad. "He's not softening you, is he? Some men think being intense is the same as being supportive. He's not softening me." I thought about the conversation we'd had the week before, when I'd been frustrated about a deal that had gone sideways at work, and Roman had listened to the whole thing without once trying to fix it prematurely. He'd asked me 3 questions that completely reframed the situation, and then he'd said, "You already know what the answer is. You're just making sure you're right." He was correct. He makes me sharper, actually. Dana made a face that meant she was reassessing and didn't want to admit it. Fine. Roman was meticulous in ways I hadn't expected, but probably should have. He noticed when I was tired before I said so. He remembered what I'd mentioned in passing 3 weeks earlier and brought it back when it became relevant. He played chess badly on purpose for exactly 1 game before deciding I could handle losing, after which he played to win, and I spent several weeks furious and improving. He kept his apartment in River North in a state of deliberate order that I slowly learned was not control for its own sake, but the management of a mind that ran fast and needed visible structure to slow down. He had a record player in the corner of his living room. I found out he played piano only because I heard him at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, when I'd stayed over and he didn't know I was awake. He stopped the moment I appeared in the doorway. I sat down on the bench and told him to keep going. He looked at me for a long moment, then turned back to the keys. That felt like a threshold. The Callum situation evolved slowly, the way bruises do, getting worse before it gets better. At Nate and Bree's actual wedding in April, Callum was civil in the way that requires real effort, which I respected more than false warmth would have earned. He didn't look at me if he could avoid it. He danced with one of Bree's friends and seemed, by the end of the night, like someone who was doing the work of moving forward. Roman noticed when Callum laughed at something genuine near the end of the reception. He didn't say anything, but I saw something ease in his shoulders. "You care about him," I said. "Even with everything, he's my brother." Roman looked across the room at Callum. "We've never been good at being close, but that doesn't mean I don't. It's complicated." He looked back at me. "I'm not good at performing emotions I don't have, but I'm also not as indifferent as I seem." I know. I'd learned to read the version of him that existed under the managed surface. The way he watched out for things without announcing it. The care that came in logistics and attention rather than declarations. "You're not easy to know," I told him, "but you're worth it." He turned to look at me with an expression I still sometimes caught by surprise. This man who'd built a career on not being caught off guard, looking briefly unguarded. "I'm aware of the difficulty. I'm working on it." "Don't work on it too much," I said. "I like knowing something other people don't." He raised an eyebrow. "And what do you know? That you play Chopin at 6 in the morning, and you eat cereal for dinner when you're stressed, and you've read every book on your shelves at least twice." I looked at him steadily. "That you waited. You didn't push, didn't maneuver. You just waited for me to figure it out." I held his gaze. "I don't think that's calculated. I think that's just who you are." Something shifted in his face. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a gesture so different from his usual precision that it made my throat tight. "You're right," he said quietly. "That was just who I am." By fall, things had settled into something I hadn't dared map out at the beginning. Roman and I had a rhythm. Not the quiet, predictable rhythm of Callum and me, but something more like a current, the kind that sometimes runs fast and sometimes runs deep and keeps you paying attention. He challenged me in ways that made me better at my job and better at knowing my own mind. I challenged him in ways he didn't always enjoy in the moment, and later admitted were necessary. Callum met someone in September, a landscape contractor named Vera, who made him laugh in a way that looked uncomplicated and real. I heard about it from Bree. I felt a relief so genuine it surprised me, not just for Callum, but for the confirmation that I'd been right, that I hadn't broken something irreplaceable, that 2 people could want genuinely different things, and both eventually find them. The first Sunday dinner where all of us were in the same room, Roman and me, Callum and Vera, Roman's parents Bree and Nate, was exactly as uncomfortable as you'd expect for exactly 40 minutes, and then something relaxed. Callum made a joke about my tendency to correct people's grammar, and Roman looked at me with the expression that meant he'd been thinking the same thing, and I laughed, and it was real. The kind of real that doesn't require a perfect setup. Afterward, walking to Roman's car in the parking lot of his parents' house in Evanston, I thought about the trajectory, the party, the accidental kiss, the long months of telling myself I didn't feel what I felt, the cost of choosing honestly. "What are you thinking?" Roman asked. He asked me this often. Not to fill silence, but because he actually wanted to know. "That I kissed you by mistake," I said, "and it cost both of us something real, and I'd do it again." He looked at me. The city lights on the horizon, the cold November air the same as when this had started. The mistake or the rest of it? The rest of it, I said. Absolutely the rest of it. He opened the car door for me, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder as I got in. A small thing. The kind of thing that doesn't make any kind of story, but somehow holds the whole story in it. Some choices don't announce themselves cleanly. Some of them come disguised as accidents, as wrong turns, as moments of mortification at a rooftop party in a green dress, while your boyfriend is across the room and you've just kissed the entirely wrong man. And some of those accidents, if you're honest enough to follow them, turn out to be the most precisely right things that ever happened to you. I didn't choose Roman because he was dangerous. I chose him because when I was with him, I didn't have to perform the easier version of myself. I could be exactly as complicated and sharp and occasionally infuriating as I actually am, and he didn't just tolerate it, he showed up for it. Every time. That, in the end, is the only metric that matters. Not safety, not excitement, not what looks right from the outside. Just whether someone sees you, the actual unedited version of you, and decides that's exactly who they wanted to find.